This video is going to talk about subtracting integers. Hopefully you've watched the other video or are already comfortable with adding integers. A lot of the subtracting integers procedure is very much the same as the adding integers. So let's dig right in and look at an example. The first example says 3 minus 7. Really, I just want this to end up being 3 plus a negative 7. And now I've changed this subtraction problem into an addition problem. Let's look at why. So we began with a positive 3, and we were subtracting a 7. You can actually pretend that this subtraction sign is a negative sign that goes with the 7. So you could say this is a 3, and you're putting it with a negative 7. If that's the case, you can say 3 plus a negative 7. Well, in this case, when we add integers, we have a 3 and a negative 7, and they have opposite signs. So when they have opposite signs, we're going to subtract their absolute values. Well, the absolute value of 3 is 3, and the absolute value of negative 7 is 7. So I'm going to say 7 minus 3, and again I put this 7 first because it's bigger than the 3. 7 minus 3 is 4, and we keep the sign of the larger. So 7 was the larger of the two numbers, and its original sign was a negative. So I'm going to keep that negative sign, and my final answer was a negative 4. In the second example, we have negative 2 minus 5. Well, similar to the first problem, I'm going to turn this into an addition problem. So I have a negative 2, and it goes with a negative 5. So I'm going to add it to a negative 5. When I do that, I notice that both of my signs are the same. They're both negative. So in this case, I'm going to add their absolute values because they have the same sign. Well, the absolute value of negative 2 is 2, and the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. So I'm going to add those two values, and I'm going to get 7. And then I keep the sign of the larger. Well, 5 was the larger of the two numbers, and its original sign was negative. So this 7 is also going to be negative. Let's look at two more examples. In these cases, I'm actually going to be subtracting a negative number. Well, when I do that, here's the rule. When I have two negatives right next to each other, they're going to cancel each other out, and the two negatives are going to become a positive. So in this problem, I now have 4 plus 6. And, well, 4 plus 6 is just 10. So that's my final answer. So 4 minus a negative 6 became 4 plus 6, which is just 10. The next example is a negative 2 minus a negative 5. Well, similar to the problem we just did, these two negatives are going to become a positive, and I'm going to rewrite this problem negative 2 plus 5. Well, now I just have an addition problem where I have a negative 2 and a positive 5. Since they have opposite signs, one is negative, one is positive, I'm going to subtract their absolute values. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2, and the absolute value of 5 is 5. So when I subtract these, I'm going to say 5 minus 2, since 5 is bigger than 2, and that's going to be 3. And I'm going to keep the sign of the larger. Well, 5 was larger than 2, so its original sign right here was a positive. So this 3 is going to be a positive 3. In this next example, I have negative 9 and subtracting a negative 2. Well, once again, anytime that I have these two negative signs right next to each other, I'm going to change them into a positive sign, and the rest of my numbers are just going to come down. Well, now I just have an addition problem where I have one of the signs negative and one of the signs positive. So when I have opposite signs, I'm going to subtract their absolute values. So the absolute value of negative 9 is 9, and the absolute value of 2 is 2, I'm going to subtract those, and I'm going to get 7. Well, now I need to keep the sign of the larger one. And 9 is larger than 2, so I'm going to keep the sign that came with 9. And 9's sign was negative, so my final answer is going to be negative. Our final example is negative 7 minus 4. Well, remember, I can always kind of look at this as a negative 7 and a negative 4. And what I'm doing is adding these together. So I'm going to rewrite this problem into an addition problem. Now I have a negative 7 plus a negative 4. And when I have the signs that are the same, I'm going to add them up. So the absolute value of negative 7 is 7, and the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. And I'm going to add them, and I get 11. So now I'm going to keep the sign of the larger. 7 is larger than 4, and 7's original value had a negative in front of it. So that negative is going to stay, and my final answer is a negative 11.